Welcome to the Creating Wealth Simplified podcast. My name is Lauren Wells, here with my co-host, Chris Seveney. We're committed to providing you with the knowledge required to build wealth through real estate investing. Tired of consuming content about real estate? Stuck in analysis paralysis? Ready to do your first deal? As a member of our community, you will learn how to go from consuming content to taking that first step into the world of real estate investing. Our show is not about getting rich quick, but about providing you with the knowledge you need to take action. Join us as we speak with experienced investors who share action tips on how to escape the corporate world, start a thriving side hustle in the world of real estate, and go beyond your W-2 or 401k.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Creating Wealth Simplified podcast. I am your host, Chris Seveney, and today I'm going to talk about a topic near and dear to my heart, which is balancing note investing or real estate investing with a full-time job. And for those that don't know, share a little story about me. I have always been in real estate. I started my career in the late 90s working for a large commercial contractor as a project manager. And people ask, Chris, what did you do? I always would joke, I'm the guy in the white shirt and tie on a construction site, with that goofy hard hat that looks like they do nothing, which that was furthest from the case because we did all the behind the scenes management of that project. I did that for 15 years. I worked for real estate developers for about another 10 years. I ran a multifamily division. I ran a family office portfolio. So always been in real estate as my full-time job. So when I started my side hustle in real estate, I had that experience. So I look at it from a perspective of I had the tools, the contacts, and everything in between to be able to succinctly and easily move into having my own portfolio. Now, I want to start and say and acknowledge there are a lot of challenges when managing your investments alongside a demanding career. Not only a demanding career, but also family. Being a good spouse, being a good parent, being a good friend. It's hard. Now, I'll also say that people probably spend a lot of time relaxing or, resting their brain on things like the TV or the internet and death scrolling, where if you took some of that time and transferred it over to education, it's amazing that life-changing it can be. And for me, that's what happened, where, up until I was late 30s when I started getting involved in real estate, I'd work my butt off 60 plus hours a week. I'd come home after kids, spend time with the kids, the wife, and so forth. I was exhausted. So what I do, lay down, clicker, turn on something on the TV, a movie that I probably saw 700 times, and just vegged out. I wasn't reading books. I wasn't educating myself. I wasn't doing myself any better. I was falling into the area of, hey, I'm just going to be a full-time job guy and not have a side career. And I'm a Gen Xer, and I think a lot of Gen Xers follow that. Today, Gen Zs, millennials, and I don't even know what the other ones are called. People now are learning that, hey, look, people have side hustles because, working 9 to 5, or what I say, the 40-40-40 rule, 40 hours a week for 40 years, for 40% of your income, not going to get you very far. But there is also, when you're doing this dual commitment, got to acknowledge the time and the mental energy required for both. And I'll say for the three-legged stool, work, family, and your side hustle. And it's interesting because when people say, well, why real estate, Chris, or why note investing for yourself? And for me, especially note investing, potential for the income and wealth building. And it's active, but it's also manageable, where many of the things in note investing don't have strict time restrictions on them. There's deadlines, but there's not typically deadlines where all hell can break loose. But the most important feature for me is, and for most people, flexibility in managing investments remotely. You can do note investing anywhere in the world, as long as you have an internet connection, so which is pretty much everywhere, compared to traditional real estate. Now, you can still do real estate, but it's a little harder. And here's why. And people ask, well, how can you do it anywhere? Well, when you're a lender, you can't knock on someone's door and say, let me come see the inside of your house. Okay. So based on that, you send somebody by the property, typically to take photos of the property. When you're bidding on assets, there's typically a deadline. It's not a, hey, first come, first serve. So that's why for me, the flexibility for note investing made that dual commitment easier. Okay, Chris, that's great. But what are some of the balances? What are some of the challenges? You make it sound too easy. And trust me, I am not. There are a ton of common pain points for investors that have full-time jobs. One is time management, finding the hours for the research, the due diligence, the follow-up. And it's like anything when you're trying to educate yourself. You can't do it for a week, take 2 months off and kick back into it. You need to be consistent. It's like working out. You can't work out for a week, come back a month later and think like, okay, I'm going to be back where I was. You're probably starting over again. So that's probably the best analogy I can think of is it's the consistency, getting up every day and setting time to do those things. Of course, life happens. There's the stress of managing unexpected issues in every facet of life. In work, somebody leaves and you have to take over someone else's role. Issues arise at work where project deadlines or things happen. Family, we get sick, we're on vacation, kids' new sports, those times change, all of those things. And then note investing, say you're doing performing loans, they go non-performing, you got delinquent borrowers, you got property repairs, many different things that life happens in every situation or scenario. And Murphy's Law, they all happen at the same time. And then you just feel overwhelmed. They're like, I can't do this. And when people get overwhelmed and can't do this, what do? A lot of times they crawl up into a ball and get analysis paralysis and do nothing. And that is the worst thing you can do because you've got your family to take care of, your job, and your investments. So how did I do it? I was at a point in time, I was managing a full-time job plus 200 assets. So I was really rocking and rolling. And today, actually, with our company, we have less assets and I have more staff. And I realized, I couldn't do it all. And I wasn't the best at everything I did. So now I have an investor relations people who are much better at that than me. I have capital raising people who are much better than me. I have people who can manage the day-to-day aspect of the assets who can do it better than me. And let me focus on what I'm really good at, which is growing the business and the vision. And when you're doing all three without any help, it's very difficult to do that. But it can be done. Now, how is that done? And we talked about the consistency. Got to be consistent. But really, it boils down to time management. Fortunately or unfortunately, being an engineer, we plan everything, we schedule everything. So many times we're very good at time management. So I block dedicated times for investment tasks. Now, weekends, evenings, I used to joke that I was the midnight to 2 investor. My wife, is somebody who likes to go to bed a little earlier. So I would stay up after that and, work on investments. I would bid on assets at night when it's nice and quiet. I would, reach out to the servicers and schedule emails to go off the next day. Task management tools and prioritize tasks. There's so much software out there, between if you're using Gmail with things like Xanadu and Outlook has, To-Do, Planner, Loop, all of these task management tools that easily allow you to customize, prioritize, and track progress. But besides time management, one of the other most important features is being organized. So one of the things that I am, and this is just me, I am an inbox zero person. I go to my inbox zero every single day. And when I let people know that, the other thing I mention to people is, I'm just going to grab my little device here, called a cell phone, and let people know, hey, look, you message me something on Facebook Messenger, if you message me something on WhatsApp, if you text message me, if you use Slack, if you use, what else is there? Signal. If you message me on LinkedIn, if you message me any other way, highly likely chance it's going to be a while before I respond. And I tell people that. I'm like, if you want a response from me, you email me, because email for me has very strict rules that I get to everything every day. And that's my focus. When I get 10 text messages, I forget about them and don't check text messages every day. And I might read it and I just might forget about it because I'm like, oh, I got to get back to that person. But, my main focus has been on email, calendar, time blocking, and time management. But I also let people know that. Literally, someone texts me, I'll message them back. And there's one note investor who sends me assets all the time. And he texts them to me. And I said, hey, look, if you want a response from me, I'm not trying to be a jerk. Email me this information because I'm going to forget about this in about 20 minutes and find it 3 weeks later the next time you text me. We hope you're enjoying this episode of Creating Wealth Simplified. We wanted to take a moment and tell you more about our passive income fund at Seveney, which is open to both accredited and non-accredited investors. Our latest offering targets an 8% annual return distributed monthly with the ability to potentially achieve a greater return through our bonus share program. If you'd like more information, reach out to us at invest@seveneyinvestments.com to learn more. Thank you. So that's one half of it. We talk a little bit about embracing technology, as well as part of any business. For note investors, there's PropStream, there's DataTree, there's note calculators, there's other real estate apps for property valuation, cash flow tracking, automating recurring tasks like bill payments, expense tracking. Technology can really be helpful. The issue with technology today is there's so much of it. Which ones do you use and which ones work and which ones don't work? The reality is they all work, but what works for me may not work for you. I switched from Gmail over to Microsoft because that's what I was used to in my W-2 career, and I just found it more accustomed to what I want, and I am a creature of habit. My schedule is pretty consistent every single day. So when that gets thrown out of kilter, I go, all electrons in my brain start going off. But it's important to use technology and embrace it. Another is leveraging your professional services in regards to the teams you work with. For note investing, as an example, you want to work with servicers to handle day-to-day borrower issues, payment processing. I see some people try and service their own loans. Some people try and sell a property they take back all by themselves. Get an agent, have somebody else handle that. Legal, outsource your legal, outsource your title reviews when you're especially when you're acquiring notes. For people who own real estate, hire a reliable property manager for your rental properties. Trust me, you'll be amazed at how much time it saves you. So another, factor as well. So what are some other ways I see people do is, some people do focus on passive strategies. People realize that they don't have the time to make a full commitment. So for example, there's note investing funds that reduce that hands-on involvement. I just recorded an episode about passive versus active investing. In real estate, people, I think, better off focusing on turnkey properties or partner with an experienced investor. Buy in Class A areas versus Class C because you're probably going to have better luck from that standpoint. The other secret sauce that I kind of hinted upon, but I want to talk more about is prioritizing education and using downtime to listen to things like podcasts, webinars, read articles. Now, in the evening, last night there was a football game on. I had it on, but I also was, on YouTube watching a webinar on something that I found intriguing. And football, I love football. I love watching football. But, in the evening, it was two teams that I'm not, highly, rooting for one or the other. But it's on in the background. You see what's going on, but I could still pay attention to the webinar and learn things. And if something cool happened in football, okay, pause it, look up and see what happens, or there's always going to be a replay, multitask. And, use that time to, just lay down, listen to a podcast before you go to sleep instead of, sitting scrolling in front of a blue light that won't let you sleep. Another is engage in communities of like-minded investors. Bigger Pockets is an example. Many people on Reddit, Aura, places you can find communities for people to get more education and learning. Now, you've decided you do jump in like I did, and you've got all this stuff and you're working on all of this. One of the mistakes that I see people make once they make this leap is they don't create a balanced portfolio to diversify, spread risk among and time intensive among the tasks. So for example, I'd always recommend in notes, balance between performing, non-performing notes, diversify across, if you're real estate, maybe different asset types or locations, single family in different locations. But that diversification also typically means more work. But the biggest mistake I see people make is they scale too quickly. I remember in college, in our fraternity, really going back, I think somebody made a comment like, start small, think big, where you want to start small, but have that big mindset, but just understand you can't get to that top of the mountain immediately. And I see people either leave their job too early, which is a common theme because they think they got it, or they might have some early success, especially when somebody is looking to raise money to bring in some additional capital. And what I mean by that is they're doing their notes, going well, and they're like, go and start a fund and raise $1 million. I had this, went and raised $1 million. I'm like, $1 million, that was actually pretty easy. Yeah, because of people who knew you, friends and family. But then all of a sudden you try and raise 5 and you realize, I can't do it. It's not working. I'm stuck. I hit a glass ceiling at $1 million. And, I know one investor on the West Coast who did that and all of a sudden was like, because they left their job and then they end up having to go back to find another job where I think they probably really liked the job they were in, but was like, hey, I want to take a risk on this and, went for something else. So got to be careful on that. Start small, scale gradually, ignore all of the noise around of it's easy. You should get into multifamily right off the bat. You should do this. You don't know what you don't know. So keep your balanced portfolio, manage your risk, and grow at a pace you're comfortable with. So we wrap up this episode. I think some things that I wanted to highlight overall is, for me, what caused the most stress, challenges would be at times lack of time. You'd still time block, but there was a stress of unexpected borrower, property issues, things come up and you feel rushed, and feeling rushed puts additional stress. And even though I could solve it by time blocking, using servicers, legal teams, property managers, all the automation, still it's a solution, but it still doesn't take away that stress. And you need to make sure you manage all those consultants. Because I think the mindset for success that people need, and if this is the one takeaway for people from this episode, is acknowledge that time is your most valuable asset. It's not money. You can always get more money. Most people, if somebody finds a way to get more time, then wow, that's awesome. But remember that time is your most valuable asset. And I recommend people be proactive about, learning not only about the trades or what you want to be involved in, but the systems that can save you time, reduce stress as well. Because at the end of the day, it boils down to that time management, outsourcing, technology allow you to focus. And if you can do it and do it right, it will end up relieving stress, relieve some of that financial strain, and set you up in the future to be better off. But balancing a full-time job and investing is challenging. But with the right tools, the right mindset, you can build wealth without the burnout. So those listening, I'd love to hear if you're going down this path, share your journey, with us, with the community on our Facebook group, on LinkedIn. And also if somebody's got any tool or something they use that they've implemented that has helped them greatly in their business, leave it in the comments. Thanks for listening or watching this episode of Creating Wealth Simplified. As always, leave us a review, follow us on YouTube, and follow us on your favorite listening station. Take care, everyone, and I'll catch you on the next one. Thank you for joining Lauren and I on this episode of the Creating Wealth Simplified podcast. Each week, we bring you expert education, experience, and information in a digestible format to help you identify investment opportunities so you can build wealth through real estate and take action toward your financial goals. Enjoy the show, share with a friend, or subscribe to the show and leave us a review.